Hello folks, it's the Pace Chaser again, welcome to another one of my videos. This is the second in a series looking at photographs of the buses and coaches of East Yorkshire motor services, and in this one we're going to look at the National Bus Company era from 1969 to approximately 1986. So in part one of the series we looked at the buses and coaches before the National Bus Company was formed in 1969. If you haven't watched that one already, please do check it out on my channel. And I mentioned in there that East Yorkshire was owned by the BET Group, British Electric Traction. BET sold out to the Nationalised Transport Holding Company in 1968, and that paved the way for the formation of the National Bus Company from the 1st of January 1969, of which East Yorkshire became a subsidiary. Initially not much changed, they carried on with the traditional livery of dark blue and primrose. In 1972 the National Bus Company decided to get a bit more of a corporate image going. They allowed East Yorkshire to keep using the blue livery, but they got rid of the top band. On the original livery there was a primrose band underneath the upper deck windows. They got rid of that and painted the area blue, and they painted the lower of the bands, instead of being primrose, into white. Put the corporate fleet name on in the normal National Bus Company style with the double N logo, but they allowed East Yorkshire to keep the white band around the roof that was a feature of the traditional livery. Whether that was officially sanctioned or whether nobody from head office looked upwards, I don't know. So they used that livery for a couple of years. Some sources said they used black and white, but it didn't. It was the dark blue, and it was the same blue that they'd used before on the traditional livery. Exactly the same blue, the same tints of paint. It just looked a bit darker with the white relief and the grey wheels, as opposed to the primrose relief and the primrose wheels of the old livery. The contrast with the white made it look a bit darker, but it was blue and not black. So that livery survived for a couple of years, and in 1974 the National Bus Company decided that their subsidiaries should use one of two colours, either poppy red or leaf green. So East Yorkshire opted for poppy red, as modelled here. And buses were poppy red with a white band, as you can see there. Coaches were painted white, and dual purpose vehicles, so those that could be used as a bus or a coach, and those used on local express services, were half red and half white. We'll see all of those liveries in a moment. I'm going to go through in fleet number order rather than any kind of chronological order. So we're going to start with vehicle number 5, and here it is. So the 1974 edict on liveries lasted about 10 years or so, and then it became obvious that the government were going to deregulate and privatise the bus industry. It became obvious that the writing was on the wall for National Bus, so they relaxed their requirements a little bit in terms of liveries, and one of the first ones was they allowed the subsidiaries to have their own local coach liveries. They were all in the same style, on a white base with a black skirt, but they allowed them to pick two colours that they wanted for their local coach livery. It was known as the Venetian blind livery. This one hasn't got the full effect, it's only got a few bits of stripe here. But there were, on most of them, there was a series of stripes going down there which looked like a Venetian blind, hence the nickname. So East Yorkshire picked two shades of blue, which was a nod to their traditional liveries, dark blue and primrose for buses, and primrose with a lighter blue for coaches. And it looked very nice. Indeed, every livery that any National Bus Company subsidiary did in that style looked nice. Southern National picked brown and yellow for their livery, which sounds horrendous when you talk about it or see it written on paper, but actually looked really, really good. So vehicle number 5 was a Plaxton Paramount 3200 bodied Leyland Tiger. It was delivered in July of 1983, but didn't enter service until January of 1984. The reason for that was probably financial. How National Bus Company worked was the head office centrally ordered all of the buses for the next year. Did it a year in advance, so they go up to British Leyland and say, right, we want 200 Leyland Olympians next year, we want 100 Leyland National 2s, and we want 100 Leyland Tigers. Then they go around to bodybuilders and find out who could fit bodies to the chassis they'd ordered. In the meantime, the subsidiaries had to apply for the buses they wanted in the following year. They had to say how many they wanted, what sort, single deck, double deck, coach, etc. If there was a choice of chassis, what chassis they would prefer, and then what they wanted them for and which vehicles they would replace. Head office would then review the applications, and then if you were lucky you get all the buses you'd asked for. If you weren't so lucky you might get fewer, or you might get different types to the ones that you'd ordered. When the buses were delivered to the subsidiaries then had to pay for them. So they paid the head office for them on delivery. Now, East Yorkshire's finances in the early 80s weren't brilliant. The best thing you can say about them is they weren't as bad as Lincolnshire Road Cars. Lincolnshire Road Car, for some years in the late 70s, early 80s, didn't even warrant a full management team. The general manager of East Yorkshire also managed Lincolnshire Road Car, and some of the back office functions, like payroll, for example, were done by East Yorkshire at Anlaby Road in Hull. When privatisation started to loom, they gave Lincolnshire Road Car a full management and back office team, because obviously you couldn't really privatise a company that couldn't stand on its own 2 feet. But yeah, the financial situation of both wasn't great. There was a bit of leeway when the bus was delivered if the subsidiary couldn't pay for it there and then. There was a few months' grace allowed for them to raise the money. If they still couldn't, the buses would be sent elsewhere to somebody who could pay for them. But I think in this case, obviously the bus was delivered in July 1983. By look of it, East Yorkshire couldn't pay for it straight away, but by January 1984 they'd raised the funds and they managed to pay for it and keep it. They weren't allowed to use the bus in the meantime until they'd paid for it. They had to just keep it stored in the garage in as new condition. But as I say, it entered service in January 1984. It was registered A105 MKH. In 1986 it was painted into the local coach livery that we've been talking about. It would have been new in National Express livery. And in June 1986 it received the dateless registration 95 EYM that we see it carrying here. This was just at the start of the fad of putting dateless registrations onto coaches to hide their age. It does seem a little bit pointless on a vehicle that was so new, but anyway, they did it. And it's seen here in Ferrens Way in Hull, just passing the entrance to the bus station. If I just pan out a little bit, you can just about make out a Corporation Atlantean just turning off into the bus station there. So I mentioned in part 1 that when East Yorkshire was formed in 1926, they started to number the buses from 1, and all subsequent editions just took the next number in the series, so that ended up with single-deckers, double-deckers and coaches all being mixed up together. In the 1970s it became clear that that series was going to run out. They didn't want to run buses with 4-digit fleet numbers, and in any case the office systems and the very early computer that they had in use couldn't handle 4-digit numbers. So they could only go up to 999, and as I say, it became clear that the original number series was going to run out. By the early 70s they were already in the 900s. So they started a new series for single-deck buses and coaches, and left the double-deckers in the old series in the 900s to complete that one. Now I know you're thinking, where did they start the new series, Pacer Chaser? Did they start at 1 perhaps? Maybe 100 to keep everything in 3-digit series? No, you'd be completely wrong. They started at 155, obviously. The bus in question was one of 5 Alexander White-type bodied Leyland Leopards acquired from National Travel North West in May 1975. They had been new to North Western Road Car Company. And one of them seen here, 157, DDB 157C on the right in this shot, carrying the dual purpose livery, half red, half white. A further 5 White-type bodied Leopards were acquired from National Travel. In 1977 they'd also been new to North Western, and they started their own Rebel series based on the last 2 digits of the registration numbers. So on the left in this shot is vehicle number 35, JDB 235E. It looks like they're both working a private hire duty. Both of them have had some rebuilding done at the front end. They've had modified grills fitted, not really successfully, particularly in the case of 157. That looks quite horrendous. Lots of bare aluminium, and as you can see 35 has lost its front bumper at some point. In 1983 a new series was started for coaches, so they were split off from single-deck buses and dual-purpose vehicles, and they started at number 1, hence number 5 that we've just seen in the last shot. So there were 3 number series, starting at 1 for the coaches, following on from 155 for single-deck buses and dual-purpose vehicles, and for the meantime the double-deckers carried on the old series in the 900s, although a new series was started for those. I'll come back to that in a bit. So next up we've got a vehicle that me and my father both had fond memories of. My dad was a driver for East Yorkshire from 1963, and in the 1960s and 1970s he drove express coaches, so he would have driven this vehicle when it was new. This is 162 MAG 162P. It was delivered in 1975. It was a Leyland Leopard with Plaxton Supreme 3 body. It was a very early Plaxton Supreme. As you can see, it had a solid bottom to the door. Later ones had a window cut into there so the driver could see the curb. It was a batch of 4 buses, 162 and 164 were delivered in December of 1975, and the other two, 161 and 163, came in February 1976. The delay in this case was down to Leyland. They were suffering delays in delivering vehicles. I mean, it's quite rubbish really that it took several months for a batch of 4 vehicles to be delivered. So 162 would have been in all white livery with national fleet name when it was new. By this point it had been repainted into the more modern National Express livery, and it was still on full frontline duties in this view, taken in the early 1980s. The reason I've got fond memories of it, when it was demoted from frontline duties after privatisation in 1987, it was transferred to the Cherry Coaches fleet. East Yorkshire bought Cherries in 1987, and this bus was transferred across to that fleet. And one of its regular duties was to transport school kids, including me, between the 2 sites of our secondary school for PE lessons. When we were due PE, one of the other years was using the facilities at the lower school where we were attending. So we were put on the bus and taken up to the upper school to use their PE facilities. I must admit I hated school and PE in particular, but the highlight of the lesson was the ride on 162 at the start and at the end of the PE lesson. So most weeks it was that bus that turned up. I remember NGR 117T turned up, an ex-United bus one week, but usually it was 162. And it was nice to ride in the lovely interior of a Plaxton Supreme, nice and airy, footrests for you on the seat in front as well. And listen to that gorgeous bark of the Leyland 680 engine. 163 of this batch was involved in a serious accident in 1977 when still quite new. You can see the remains of it there. A Range Rover came flying towards it round the bend. The driver, Headley Tate, known to everybody as Geordie Tate, swerved to avoid it, and unfortunately the bus plunged off down a ravine. They thought they were going to come out of it relatively unscathed. It stayed on its wheels more or less all the way down. Unfortunately, just as it got near the bottom, it hit a sticking out sewage outlet pipe, which caused it to roll over and destroy the roof, as you can see. Unfortunately, 5 people were killed and quite a number injured. Unbelievably, it was a different time in the 1970s. Obviously, this bus was put back into service. The remains of the original body were taken off. The chassis was sent to a firm in Wakefield for straightening. And then my dad was dispatched to Wakefield to drive the chassis up to Plaxton's at Scarborough to have a new body fitted. Unfortunately, as he turned out the gate of the premises in Wakefield, there was a loud twang and the chassis came back out of alignment. So we drove back in and left it to be straightened again. And then another driver was subsequently sent to get the chassis, drive it up to Scarborough, and a new body was fitted, another Plaxton Supreme body, similar to the one it had when new. But yeah, it's unbelievable that was put back into service. It really was a different time. So next up, another Plaxton Supreme bodied Leyland Leopard. I should mention I used to have a really varied collection of photographs of East Yorkshire buses. Unfortunately, myself and the collection parted company. I've been scrabbling around trying to get a replacement collection in more recent years. Seems to have got a lot of Leyland Leopards, so if you don't like Leopards, I'd suggest you leave the video running and go make a cup of tea, and they might have gone by the time you come back again. But this one is 183. When it was new, it was registered BRH 183T. It was delivered in December of 1978. It would have been new in national livery. By the time of this photo, it had been repainted into the local coach livery. You can see now why they called it Venetian Blind. This has got the full version with the stripes that resemble a Venetian blind down there. And again, by the time of this photo, it received dateless registration number 4710AT. And you can just about make out it says private charter on the blind, and it's running as coach number 2 on that charter. So the Supreme 3 was replaced by the Supreme 4, and this is one with a more modern looking front end. This is 190. When new, it was registered GKH 190T, and it was delivered in July of 1979. The rest of the batch didn't come until September, so they ended up with V suffix registrations. At the time this was new, the government was still paying a 50% grant towards the cost of new buses. The idea was to promote what was then known as one-man operation, nowadays one person. So they would pay 50% of the cost of a new bus if it was suitable for one-man operation. and it was also applied to coaches as long as they were suitable for use on local services. So hence this bus carried a two-part door. Supremes with this feature were known as Supreme Expresses. So the two-part door to make it easier for local passengers to board. They had to have a cab door, whereas full coach Leopards didn't have. You could just walk into the driving cab if you wanted to. And they had to have fitment for a ticket machine. You can see the ticket machine sticking up in the window of 190 there. They also had to spend a certain proportion of the mileage each year on local service work. It was audited every year, and if it was found that the vehicle hadn't done its local service mileage, the grant became payable back to the government. You had to pay them back. Now, for most of the year, this bus was used as a coach, so there'd be a mad scramble every summer when it came up to its yearly anniversary to get its local service mileage in. It would find itself, wherever it had been working for the rest of the year, it would find itself working from Anderby Road Garage in Hull on local runs. I remember it particularly on the 62 to Setting Dyke estate. It's a relatively short service, but you could get there and back in an hour, so it could just keep going up and down every hour and build its mileage that way. And then once it had got its required mileage, it would go back onto its coach duties for the rest of the next year. In this view, it's on the parking area behind Hull bus station that was known as the Muck, and it appears to have worked the back road service from Withensea, showing 174 on the blind. In 1986, as part of the 60th anniversary celebrations of East Yorkshire, it was painted back into the old East Yorkshire coach livery, as you can see here, and it was named Holderness Star and given the dateless registration number 8225KH. Now, standing next to 190 in this view is a Bristol VR 502 registered JKH 502V. Now, I mentioned earlier on that the double-deckers carried on the original number series in the 900s. So vehicle 991 was delivered in May 1979. The next batch of buses that had been ordered numbered 10 vehicles, and that would obviously take them over 1,000, which they couldn't do. So they began a new number series at 501, and this batch was delivered in October 1979, so that's vehicle 502. It was a Highbridge Eastern Coachworks bodied Bristol VR. So Highbridge, it had 14'6" high bodywork. That was a less common height of Bristol VRs. And the batch had Leyland engines, as a lot of the Bristol VRs that had come before had. These ones featured slightly upgraded passenger comfort because they had maquette seats rather than the vinyl ones of the previous batches. But the Highbridge vehicles weren't particularly popular with drivers. When you got on, there were a couple of steps up, as you would expect, but then behind the cab there was another step. Now, passengers tended to just get up, pay the fare, take the ticket, and then walk into the bus and not realise there was another step there, so they'd fall over, and drivers were constantly having to pick people up off the floor as a result. There were bright yellow notices put next to the step to try and warn people, and then over the years more and more notices were put up. Areas of yellow shark's tooth edging were put on the steps, but nothing seemed to work. Eventually one of the buses, I think it was 507, was rebuilt, so it had a couple of deeper steps going into the doorway, but they did away with the step behind, and that worked. But unfortunately by the time they did it, the buses were quite old and it wasn't considered worth the investment in doing the rest of them. So 502 for much of its life was a Hornsey allocated bus. A lot of the depots outside of Hull had fill-in turns on local services around Hull, mainly to increase the takings of the depot to improve the balance sheet a little bit, because a lot of the rural services they operated didn't take a lot. They ran through vast areas of rural landscape and didn't really pick anybody up, so they had a few local runs around Hull just to get the takings up. And 502 there is doing a fill-in turn to Headon on Route 78. That would travel out via Headon Road and Paul, and when it got to Headon it would become a 277 and run back in via Bilton and Holderness Road to Hull, and then the bus would make its way back to its home depot of Hornsey. So back to the Leopards, another one of the same batch as 190, but one of the V registered ones, because it was delivered in September 1979 after the letter changed for the registrations. This is 192 registered JKH 192V, again seen in local coach livery, presumably in southern Scotland because it's got a Clydeside Scottish routemaster standing next to it. And as you can see, it's working a national holidays duty. Now when my father died, I found this shot in the personal photographs. This is 193 registered JKH 193V, and it's being driven by Hornsey driver Harry Robinson, who was a friend of my father's, hence why it was in the personal photographs. Harry left school aged 14, as did a lot of boys in that era. Would have been about 1937, and he started with East Yorkshire straight from school. He was a messenger lad originally. He turned 18 during the Second World War, so he was called up for military service for a while. When he was demobbed, he returned to East Yorkshire, and he worked there for all of his working life. For many years, he was based at Hornsey. For the last year or so that he drove there, he transferred to Anderby Road Garage in Hull, and he retired in 1988. We'll see him again later on. In fact, we've just seen him in the shot at the start of the video, but I'll come back to that photo later on. It was interesting to know somebody of Harry's generation, because when he started there were still petrol engine buses in the fleet, and there were still some vehicles that had starting handles, and he also would have seen during the war years vehicles with gas producer trailers and things like that. All these things that we see photographs of now in archives and things, and they don't seem real, but obviously it was interesting to talk to somebody who'd actually seen them and worked with them. So another one of the same batch there, 194 JKH 194V, again in local coach livery. This time it's worked a bus service in from Witheransea to Hull. Just arrived in the Hull bus station, and it's about to return to Witheransea according to the blind on Route 76C. So last of the leopards now, this is vehicle 209, registered IUF 813H. It's a second-hand bus. It was acquired from Southdown Motor Services in April 1981. It was new to them in 1970. As you can tell, it wasn't actually repainted when it arrived. It arrived in the white National coach livery, and it just had the Southdown name taken off and an East Yorkshire one substituted. You can tell that by the clean patch around the name there. It's seen in Wellington Street coach station in Leeds. And it was a duple-bodied Leyland Leopard. I believe it was a duple Commander. Two of them were acquired. The other one was IUF 814H, which had a reflective registration plate on the front, rather than the white on black one that you can see on 209 here. So we saw 502 earlier on. This is sister vehicle 501, the first one numbered in the new double-deck numbering series in 1979. JKH 501V, another Bristol VR with 14'6" high hybrid Eastern Coachworks bodywork and a Leyland engine and maquette seats. Some of the distortion here, this is a print of a scan that I've got, but that's from the printer, but the weird effect on the front dome was actually on the bus. As you can see, the paint's kind of faded unevenly up there. So it's seen in Short Street in Hull bus station, on a short-lived extension of Route 62 up to Beverley. The 62 normally ran between Hull and the Setting Dyke estate via Anderby Road and Priory Road. For a short time it was extended further along Priory Road to Cottingham, and then, if I remember rightly, it went past Castle Hill Hospital and down the A164 to Beverley, whereas the traditional Route 61 that went out of Hull the same way continued through Skibby and Little Wheaton to get to Beverley. But this was a slightly faster service, as I say, down the A164. It didn't last long, that extension. The 62 was soon cut back to Setting Dyke estate again. The condition of this bus is pretty standard for national bus days. Unfortunately, there's not much gloss left in the paint. The wheels look mucky and scruffy, and the whole thing looks a bit unkempt. It's not really helped by the rather dowdy adverts either side of the destination blind, trying to exhort you to hire a coach from East Yorkshire. So next up we've got 519, PAG 519W. This was a Bristol VR with Eastern Coachworks body of the more normal 13'8" high low height version. These were the pinnacle of the Bristol VR with East Yorkshire. They had maquette seats and they had Gardner 6 LXB engines. They were really reliable and they were quite quick as well. 519 was the last of a batch of 9 vehicles delivered in August and September of 1980. When it was delivered, it was in normal poppy red fleet livery. In November 1981 it was repainted into the traditional blue and primrose livery, as you can see here, although it didn't have the higher level primrose band. It was done really as a morale booster. The early 80s were quite a bad time for bus staff. Deregulation and privatisation were looming on the horizon. Indeed, coach services were actually deregulated in 1980. So everybody was a bit uncertain about the future, whether they'd have jobs and things. The bus grant for new buses was ending as well, so new bus orders plummeted. and increasingly maintenance staff and drivers had to make do with vehicles that would normally have been replaced, that were kept in service, and then were falling receipts, and they weren't making as much money and things like that. So it was a pretty dire time. So the repaint was really done as a morale booster. For the staff in general, the drivers loved driving it. Obviously, like any organisation, every driver you spoke to absolutely hated buses until that turned up, and then they waxed lyrical about the good old days of East Yorkshire. A lot of the drivers at that stage remembered the company before it became part of the National Bus Company, when they actually used that livery. It was a good morale booster for the painters as well. The painters at East Yorkshire were, and as far as I know still are, craftsman painters. Although they spent a lot of time spraying vehicles, they could hand paint them in the traditional style with umpteen coats of undercoat, top coat and then varnish. And it must have been quite disheartening to just daub everything in poppy red. So it was a good morale boost for them to get the good traditional livery on this one. The lettering under the blind when it was first done read as it does there: EYMS serving the East Riding and Humberside since 1926. In 1986 that was modified to read serving the East Riding and Humberside for 60 years to celebrate the 60th anniversary of East Yorkshire, and then after the anniversary year it was modified back to the way you see it here, serving since 1926. It carried that livery until about 1991 when it finally received fleet livery again. It's another bus that I've got fond memories of. I'd have just turned 4 when this was painted in the blue livery. And just getting into buses at that age. So obviously it was normally a sea of red where we lived, just outside Hull. So to see a bus in that livery was something different, and it was notable, and I noticed it. I was well pleased one day when we went out for a trip to Bridlington in the summer holidays. The East Yorkshire used to run services known as breakaway expresses during the summer holidays. They went from Hull to places like Bridlington and Scarborough, Lincoln and York, among other places. And they were just designed so you could have a day out with your kids. So we turned up for route 821, which went from Hull to Scarborough, one day for a trip to Bridlington. And 519 turned up, and I got the coveted seat up on the offside of the upper deck, the upstairs front seat, with my mum and dad. So I remember it well. I was really chuffed to get on the bus, to the extent that I repainted an EFE Bristol VR model into the livery, complete with lettering under the blind, and on route 821 to Scarborough. But that of course is what this hobby is about. It's not just about fleet numbers and registration numbers and bus types and liveries. The buses also form part of our lives, you know, the memories that are made. They took us to school, to work, you know, to the first date with somebody, etc, etc. You know, they're part of the tapestry of our lives. So the successor to the Bristol VR was the Learned Olympian. That became the standard National Bus Company vehicle. We came with Eastern Coachworks bodywork, but with an updated design. This is vehicle 532, A532 OKH. 11 Olympians were bought by East Yorkshire during National Bus Company days. And this was the 5th one to arrive in December 1983. It's seen in Hull bus station, about to return to Hornsey via Leven on route 240, and it carries the full National Bus local coach livery with the Venetian blind stripes going down to the front wheel there. Hornsey was a bit of a Cinderella depot in the 80s. It had a lot of well-used vehicles, shall we say, but they always tried to put at least one better bus there, and this is what 532 would have been fulfilling in the allocation at that time, to give them something a bit more decent. Looking resplendent there in a local coach livery. I suspect this is shortly after deregulation, because instead of the National Bus double N symbol, it's got the Yorkshire Rose there, but the fleet name is still in the National Bus standard style. I've actually skipped a bus there, sorry about that. I've got a photo here of another Bristol VR 527 WKH 527X. It was the last Bristol VR purchased new by East Yorkshire. It arrived in August of 1981. In March 1983 it received an all-over advert for East Yorkshire coach hire, and in December 1985 it received this all-over advert for the Viking Radio, which was a fairly newly launched at the time commercial radio station. I'm guessing the advert was partly sponsored by Tetley's, because it carried advertising for Tetley's around the destination blind, as you can see. Tetley's beer brewed in Leeds. As with a lot of all over adverts at this time, it had the East Yorkshire name attached to the grille, so you could tell who was running the bus. You can see it's got the National Bus double N symbol there as well. It's another view in Short Street in Hull, just in Hull bus station. It's about to set off to Willoughby on the 64, which was a circular service. It went out via Anlaby Road and Priory Road to Cottingham, then up past Castle Hill Hospital to Willoughby. In National Bus Company days, it returned to Hull as a 181. So from Willoughby it went through Anlaby to Hesel and then down Hesel Road. About the time of deregulation in 1986 it was changed, so it was linked to Route 44 as it was then. So it went back from Willoughby via Willoughby Road directly into Hull. The problem with that was a lot of the journeys on the 44 only ran between Hull and Willoughby. They didn't continue as 64s, only one per hour did, and passengers couldn't tell which one was going to continue beyond Willoughby. So they changed the number of the one that continued as a 64 to 47 after a while, so it became a 64-47 circular. But back in the days this was taken, National Bus days, it would have returned, as I say, as a 181 via Hesel and Hesel Road. So back to the number sequence now. We've got another Olympian, vehicle 535 B535WAT, and that was delivered in January of 1985. It's another Eastern Coachworks bodied Olympian, and like 532 that we've just seen, it was fitted with high-backed coach type seats, as were most of the Olympians that were delivered new to East Yorkshire. I think it was only the first one, 528, that was fitted with bus seats. Possibly 529 might have been fitted with bus seats when it was new, but it was reseated at some point with coach seats, I believe. But certainly the vast majority of the ones delivered were fitted with coach type seating. It's seen here parts on the muck behind Hull bus station, in between runs on the service over the Humber Bridge, the 350 to Scunthorpe. That was jointly worked with Lincolnshire Roadcar. East Yorkshire ran one of the duty boards on it and Lincolnshire Roadcar ran two. It was marketed as the Humberlink service. You can just about see the Humberlink logo underneath the Scunthorpe destination. It's got the National Bus Company double N symbol and the British Rail logo, because the service connected Barton on Humber with trains to and from Grimsby and Cleethorpes. So you could buy a through ticket, as far as I'm aware, if I remember correctly. So you could buy a Hull to Grimsby ticket and get the train from Barton. So I used this shot in the first part of this series to illustrate the North Bar in Beverley that necessitated for many years a lot of the double-deckers of East Yorkshire having a strange roof profile. Passing under it is Daimler Fleet Line with Park Royal Body 872, RAT 872G, delivered in 1969. It was the last bus delivered that was modified to pass under the bar. By this point the buses were low enough to not need the full roof modification. The upper deck side windows were just raked inwards at an angle, which you can just about see in this photo. The occasion was, I think it was approximately 1982, and the bus was scheduled for withdrawal, so it was going to be the last modified Beverley bar bus in the fleet. It turned out to be quite premature, because the bus stayed in service and was withdrawn in 1991, and indeed several others of the same type were reinstated for a few years shortly after this happened. But it ran through the bar, gave rides to members of the public along with some preserved vehicles. You can see a preserved bus just through the archway there, about to follow. So an interesting one now, we've got vehicle 899 registered AAT 399K. It's a Leyland Atlantean with a low height Alexander body, and it was delivered in September of 1971. There were 5 vehicles in this batch. They were ordered by Western Welsh, and I believe 4 of them were actually delivered to Western Welsh. This one was registered VUH 385J, but before they entered service they were diverted by National Bus Company head office up to East Yorkshire, and they were re-registered with Hull area registrations before they entered service. I do remember these quite clearly. They were quite claustrophobic inside. There was a lot of metal and fiberglass and not that much glass, and they had a very heavy ventilator at the rear of the upper deck. But they gave good service. As I said, they entered service in 1971. They were mainly used around Hull on the local routes, and they were withdrawn around the time of deregulation in 1986 after 15 years service. But they were stored for a period, and then they came back into traffic in about 1987 for a short period of time as well. So they owed nobody anything by the time they were finally withdrawn. This one's got adverts either side of the blind for coach hire again, as we saw on 501. and it's on another circular service, the 104. I mentioned in the first part the various methods that East Yorkshire used to avoid winding the blind. On older buses they had a hinged flap that we talked about in part 1. On the more modern vehicles, you can't really see it here, but above the hull in smaller letters would have been the words to and from, if the hull was set correctly. So the full blind would read to and from Hull and Willoughby, and the idea was that the driver didn't have to wind the destination blind between runs. They would have had to wind the service number on this one because the 104 returned to Hull as a 4, so it went out via Cottingham Road to Cottingham, up past Castle Hill Hospital to Willoughby, and then back down Willoughby Road into Hull. And as far as I remember, when they'd done a 104 4, they did a 104. So this one's arrived in Hull on a 104. It would, I think, go back out as a 104 and then turn into a 4 at Willoughby and come back around again. So the 70s and 80s weren't all doom and gloom. In 1979, East Yorkshire decided to do what a few other companies were doing at about that time, and to start running an open-top bus service, in their case in Bridlington. They woke up to the extra revenue potential of that. So they converted 2 Alexander Body Daimler Fleet lines to open top. I believe they were done in the engineering works at Alderby Common. The 2 vehicles involved have been used at Tynemouth and District that were part of the Northern General Group. They were new in 1965. They come to East Yorkshire in 1972. There was an exchange of vehicles. 20 AEC Renowns from East Yorkshire went up to Tynemouth, and in their place 20 Daimler Fleet lines came down to East Yorkshire. 10 of them were Alexander bodied and 10 were bodied by Metro Camel. So this one was fleet number 900, registration AFT 783C, and it was named Belvedere Star. The 2 original open toppers, the liveries for them were designed by local school children in Bridlington. So this one was designed by a 13-year-old girl called Nicola Corby. The service operation ran through Bridlington from Belvedere in the south up to Sewerby in the north, and it was marketed, as you can see, as East Yorkshire Coaster. And this picture is actually a postcard. East Yorkshire had some postcards published that they could then sell to the passengers as souvenirs of their trip. So the other one converted was 901 AFT 784C, which was named Sewerby Star. And this was another livery designed by a local schoolgirl, in this case Jacqueline Warnford, who was aged 7 at the time. It's quite a stunning livery on that one. I mean, even nowadays that would pass muster, and back in 1979 when everything else was red, it really would have stood out. So the open top service was successful enough that it was extended up to Flamborough, needing an extra bus. And so to accommodate that, in April 1982, East Yorkshire acquired a Metro Camel Wayman-bodied Leyland Atlantean from Devon General. Registered 926 GTA, it was numbered 902. It was part of a batch that were delivered new as convertible open toppers to Devon General, and East Yorkshire bought both of the tops. It wasn't like a car, you didn't just flip a lever and pull the roof back. You needed a crane to lift the top part on and off. So you can see it here with the summertime assembly of railings and plastic windows. But for the winter you could lift that off with a crane and put the roof section back on, have a proper roof on it. So this bus was named Flamborough Star. It was painted in a modified version of the standard livery of red and white, still with the East Yorkshire Coaster names. It had been used to Devon General in 1961, and it was numbered DL926 with them. So the 2X Tynemouth fleet lines had quite a hard life before they were converted to open top. They were becoming life expired by 1983. 900 was withdrawn in March of 1983, but 901 managed a final season. It was withdrawn in September of that year. The replacements were more 1961 Atlanteans from Devon General, more of the convertible open toppers. In this view we see 903 registered 931 GTA with its roof section in place. It was named Bridlington Star, and it was painted in a white and black livery that was inspired by Hull FC Rugby Club. This bus arrived in April 1983 with East Yorkshire, and it was the replacement for 900 that, as we said, was withdrawn before the 1983 season. 2 further ones of the same type required 932 GTA and 928 GTA. 932 came directly from Devon General, 928 came via Lincolnshire Roadcar. 932 GTA became fleet number 904 and named Belvedere Star, and it received the local coach livery like we saw on the Olympians, the blue and white Venetian blind livery. 928 was allocated fleet number 905, but it didn't enter service and it ended up being sold without being used by East Yorkshire, and the slack on the open top service was just covered by a normal closed top vehicle then, so you had the two open top Atlanteans running on it along with just any old normal closed top vehicle from the main fleet. So I mentioned that 20 Daimler Fleet Lines were received from Tynemouth, 10 of them had Alexander bodies. I think I said Metro Camel for the other 10, it wasn't, it was Wayman, the associated company. The other 10 had Wayman bodies, and they're dated from 1963, and he received HFT 372, East Yorkshire Fleet number 916. One of the Wayman bodied vehicles. It's seen in the original NBC blue livery, and I think the location is the forecourt of Pocklington Garage. It just works into Pocklington on Route 94. You can see a single decker Marshall bodied in red livery behind it, and this bus 916 was withdrawn from service in 1979. So we've got 1974 Atlantean, now one of 15 that were delivered with Park Royal bodies. They were some of the first vehicles to be delivered in poppy red livery, and this is 946 registered PAT 946M, seen on the muck behind Hull bus station between duties on the 151. You can just about make out the to and from lettering above the hull. Again, it's not quite properly set, but it would have read again to and from Hull and Willoughby, and the 151 was just an out and back service via Anderby. As you can see, it's running with a fare box, so it'd be exact fare. It's got the fare box bus sign put up in the window. If for any reason it wasn't running with a fare box, that would be hinged back down so you couldn't see it. They gave good service, these buses. They were built like tanks, and they did hard work around Hull for many years. The last of them were finally withdrawn in the sort of early to mid 90s. Another of the batch now, 949 PAT 949M. And the return of Harry Robinson as promised. In the summer, the 130 service between Hornsey and Bridlington was doubled in frequency. The number of journeys was doubled, and the peak vehicle requirement for it was increased from one vehicle to two. To cope with that, Anderby Road would send a Leyland Atlantean with Park Royal body every summer to Hornsey for a few weeks, and it would join their allocation. It was more or less always an Atlantean. The year this was taken isn't recorded, but obviously the year in question, 949, was the bus that found itself at Hornsey for the summer. And Harry's leaning out the cab in typically ebullient style. He developed a liking for these buses from the summertime loans. He really did like them. As I said, for the last year or so that he worked at East Yorkshire, he transferred back to Anderby Road Garage in Hull. And his last duty was to do a couple of the evening runs on the 350 service as far as Barton-on-Humber. Although in the daytime it went through to Scunthorpe, in the evening it just ran between Hull and Barton-on-Humber. It was operated just by East Yorkshire, and his last duty was a couple of those. It was common practice in the 80s and in the 90s for that matter for the older vehicles in the fleet to be run off after the evening peak. So they would come into Hull bus station, offload the passengers and go and park up on the muck, and then the running boards would be taken over by newer vehicles that would continue to the end of service. And the older ones would be taken back up to the garage as and when they could be by drivers coming in to finish the shifts. So Harry had a Leyland Olympian allocated for his last couple of journeys. However, he saw one of the Park Royal Atlanteans standing across the muck waiting to go back to garage. He had a word with the duty inspector and said, "Look, it's my last day, can I take that one instead?" And the inspector allowed him to do so. So we did a couple of runs to Barton-on-Humber and back over the Humber Bridge with one of these Atlanteans. I can't remember the number of it. I think he said it was 948, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But as far as I know, it's the only time an Atlantean was used on the Humber Bridge service. I don't think there were any other instances of it. They certainly wouldn't have been commonplace on there. So we've just got one final view. This is a view of the muck, a general view, taken around 1986, just before deregulation. And this is another print of a scan From left you've got 929, registered DKH 929L, which was a 1973 Mark II Bristol VR with Eastern Coachworks body. As I mentioned earlier on, East Yorkshire had been part of the BET group traditionally, but that batch of VRs had Tilling style green and red maquette in them, which must have been a culture shock for BET, or ex-BET staff at East Yorkshire. Between duties there on the 79 to Headon, which went out via Headon Road but didn't go around Paul as far as I remember. Next to it you've got Leyland National B series, so 10 metres long and with no heating pod, it just had conventional heaters. It's number 178 BRH 178T. East Yorkshire didn't really like Leyland Nationals, they were kind of forced to take some of them. They had a batch of, I think it was 5 of the longer 11 metre long ones. And then they took a couple of batches of the shorter B series. Never really found a niche. They spent a lot of time working in Bridlington on the town services, but they were kind of a bit nomadic. They never really seemed to settle anywhere. Any one time Hull would have a couple on its allocation, and they would often be used on Route 13 up to Ellerman Avenue on the North Hull estate, although that one appears to have come in on a 180. And then next to it you've got 3 of the Parker Rail body Atlanteans, that's 956, 950 and 954. As you can see, 956 had its pay as you enter sign taken off the front. They've all still got the 2-part blinds. They will eventually be rebuilt to just have a single line destination blind instead of the 2 blinds that you can see there. That one's run in on the 13 from Ellerman Avenue that we've just been talking about. 950's come in on a works contract from the Brough British Aerospace factory, the 607. They were subsequently banned from that because the heaters were notorious in these buses for not working. And one of the shift supervisors contacted East Yorkshire to complain that he was sick of his workers turning up on cold mornings and spending the first 20 minutes of the shift huddled around the heaters and not actually working. And he found out from a driver which buses were involved, and basically threatened that if they kept using them on there, they would take the contract away from them. So they were banned from working the Brough Aerospace journeys shortly after this one was pictured. So yeah, that's it for this part of this series. The next one, part 3, we'll look at the route masters that were operated by East Yorkshire. We'll take a short break from doing the chronological advancement through the eras. So we're going to look at the route master buses that they operated. And then part 4 we'll look at the early deregulation days. And we'll have quite a good variety of buses in that one. Looking forward to that one. So please look out for those. They'll be coming on my channel in the next few weeks or so. Thank you for watching. If you have enjoyed the video, please click the like button so more people can find it. And please do consider subscribing for more content. But as always, take care of yourselves. Thank you again for watching. I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.